I say again because I was here 2 years ago, and a long time ago, you may remember that horrible time that was called COVID, that I was here, I zoomed in at one point. So I've been here a couple of times, and it's been a blessing every time. For those of you who don't know me, Pastor Ken said, introduce myself. So my name is Randy Clausen. I'm from Saskatoon, and I'm a husband and a father of 4, a grandfather to 8, and we've been enjoying, some of the out-of-town grandkids have been with us for the last week, and we'll be in Saskatoon area for another week or 2 yet, and so that's always a joy. I have been working with MCC, Mennonite Central Committee, for about 10 years, and before that I taught at Bethany College, Bible College, just north of Saskatoon. But what that really means, the outflow of that, as I experienced it this morning, and what a beautiful morning drive it was, and as we were singing How Great Thou Art, and just thinking of the beauty of God's creation, I just experienced that again on this 2.5-hour trip. But I also thought, okay, I'm driving through Lanigan, and there's Pastor Tim Peters and his wife Jamie, who were students of mine at Bethany. And then we go through Wynyard, and then there's Tim Falk and Kaylee Falk, and they were students of mine at Bethany. And I went to Bible college with Tim's parents, and I know his grandparents. And then I come through Foam Lake here. And I've been getting to know Pastor Ken over the years, and he was in a course that I taught at Horizon College a year ago. And I see in your bulletin you've got Stephen Schmidt coming to speak from Yorkton, and he too was a student of mine. And you've got the Liddells in Winnipeg, and Sherry, formerly Sherry Bright, was a student of mine. And just seeing how a place like that, the ministry is spreading throughout Saskatchewan and around the world. It just is such a blessing to be a part of that. And seeing how God blesses through, what was the phrase there from 2 Corinthians, bountiful reaping. And I just have a sense of that this morning. And it's been a real blessing. And the music that started off, thank you for the team that did that. And especially thank you for the banjo. My wife has been playing banjo for the last couple of years, and it is just the happiest sound in the world. And I mean, I won't say more about that, but I love to hear it, and I love to hear it in worship. So that's just been great. So I'm here from MCC. I want to say thank you for your faithful ministry, for the many ways that you are at work in the ministry here in Foam Lake and how that's connected around the world. And we are grateful that you include MCC as part of your global ministry. And also MDS. MDS and MCC, all these initials, they're sibling organizations. They started out together, and MDS deals with relief work here in North America. MCC does relief and development work and peace building work in the rest of the world. So that's the arrangement between them. So if there's a crisis, a flood or fire, tornado, something in North America, then MDS kicks into action. If it's somewhere else, then MCC. If we are at work in those countries. And MCC is active in about 45 countries around the world. And so then that's when MCC comes into action. So I want to greet you with words from we've already heard Psalm 67. I'm going to the next one, Psalm 68. 2 verses from Psalm 68, starting in verse 4. Sing to God, sing in praise of his name. Extol him who rides on the clouds. Rejoice before him. His name is the Lord. A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. So this morning I want to share with you a couple of stories of the kinds of ministry that you are supporting through your faithful generosity, through MCC and other organizations. This morning I want to share pictures with you of what MCC does as we share God's love and compassion for all in the name of Christ. And we do this specifically with the work of relief and development and peace building. And you'll get a sense of that as I share some stories. Let me make sure that this clicker is on. The power button is on the side, and yeah, good to go. It just buzzed. So as you can see, I'm calling this talk, this teaching time, MCC and Mothers. And I will admit that the seeds of this began last Mother's Day when I gave a small presentation to a gathering in Saskatoon. And so today isn't Mother's Day, but maybe it should be. Mums, would it make sense to you to have more than once a year that it would be declared Mother's Day? I think for the work that you do, for the responsibility on your shoulders, it would make sense to have more Mother's Days. So I'm not declaring that, but just to all the men in the room, just a hint, okay? Just a hint. But as I've been reflecting on these stories about mothers, and we'll hear a number of stories about mothers, I realize that there's more depth here than we might think. It's more than just motherhood and apple pie kinds of things that I want to be talking about. There are important reasons why MCC's work often focuses on mothers in communities. Because around the world, women are almost always more vulnerable than men in a community, whether that's physically or socially or economically. The Bible is well aware of this. In the Old Testament, God established laws protecting the vulnerable. And the list of vulnerable people, again, almost always includes these three groups. It starts with widows, the unprotected women. It talks about orphans, unprotected children, and refugees or unprotected newcomers. So how many stories do we read in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, of women who are in a vulnerable position or are victims of injustice? Women like Ruth, who don't have access to land to feed themselves or their family. Women like Tamar, who are forced into unsavory occupations, forced to sell themselves as a survival tactic. Or like women in Jesus' world whose savings are being devoured by shady bankers, where Jesus says that these people are devouring widows' houses. So, and we shouldn't think that these social power imbalances are only ancient realities. The dynamics that make women more vulnerable are alive and well around the world, and here in Saskatchewan also. I don't know if you heard of this in the news, but just this last week there was a survey that was released here in Canada from the National Institute on Aging. Women are living longer than men. On average, it's almost 5 years longer. But older women, as they describe them, that is women that are 50 and older, have more concern about finances than men. About a quarter of women over 50 have less than $5,000 saved for retirement. Women over 50 in Canada experience more social isolation, which is made worse if there's inadequate income. Older women in Canada are more likely to be unable to afford the essentials of food or housing or medicines. And so these are realities in every town and city and village in Saskatchewan and across the country. Another more serious indicator of the vulnerabilities of women is what's known as intimate partner violence. And yes, this can happen to anyone, but women by far are the victims of this kind of violence. And tragically, Saskatchewan has the highest rate of all Canadian provinces of intimate partner violence. So MCC in Saskatchewan is working actively to address this reality. My colleague Heather heads up a support circle called You Are Not Alone for women who have experienced intimate partner violence. And if you know anybody in this community who might be benefiting, who might be able to benefit from this, please, there's more information on the poster that you've got up in the lobby there. But it's a 6-week series that's available online, so it's available to anybody in Saskatchewan. And we think that this is one significant way that MCC can be part of addressing, helping, supporting these challenges which are right here in our homes here in Saskatchewan. So what does God think about the injustices that are suffered by widows and by vulnerable mothers? The prophets spoke out against injustices done to widows. As Isaiah says, stop doing wrong, learn to do right, as he's speaking to the people of Israel. Seek justice, encourage the oppressed, defend the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Jesus himself took action to break the cultural taboos that treated women as second-class citizens. Jesus spoke with them in public, something that was not seen as appropriate. Jesus defended women from men who were making public accusations against them while protecting the real offender. Jesus healed women, unconcerned about the taboos associated with their bleeding. Jesus invited and blessed women to sit as his disciples, equally with men. And most amazingly, as Jesus hung dying on the cross, he made sure that his own mother was going to be taken care of by his disciple John. God still cares. God still cares. God cares for vulnerable women, for the mothers who are struggling to take care of their families, for the women who are ignored or abused. James 1:27 says this, "Religion that is pure and undefiled before our God and Father is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world, to be deeply involved and engaged with those who are in distress, and yet not to be stained by it." That is what God is looking for. And that is why MCC cares about mothers, about families that are struggling. So this morning, I want to tell you stories. I want to tell you 4 stories about mothers who found themselves in a difficult situation and how their lives were changed through a connection to MCC. In each story, we can see God at work, working a legacy of love and hope into the lives of these women, their homes, their families, and their communities. So I'm going to start by telling the story of Mary Reimer and the Moscow MCC office. Mary Brieger Reimer was one of MCC's very first employees. She herself was not Mennonite. She grew up in a German Lutheran home in Latvia. In Riga, she met a young Mennonite engineer, and in 1915, they were married. Soon after, they moved from Riga to St. Petersburg because of the approaching European war. So this is in the middle of First World War. The world was in upheaval for the young couple. Mary's husband, Jacob Reimer was his name, served in alternative service with the Red Cross. During the war, they made several trips to Jacob's home in the Crimea. By 1920, they wound up living in Moscow. There, in that huge city, ravaged first by the war and then by the Russian Revolution and the unpredictability of this new Soviet regime, Mary and Jacob connected with a small Mennonite fellowship. The people there in this group, in this small church, were trying to negotiate with a new communist government for the survival of their people. On the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, the cry for help that came from the Russian Mennonite communities of impending starvation reached the ears of diverse Mennonite groups in the US and Canada. And a Mennonite Central Committee for Relief was formed in July of 1920. Among the first workers sent to organize that relief work in the new Soviet Union was a man named Alvin Miller. He was a college teacher from Maryland in the US and the son of an Amish Mennonite bishop. By 1921, Alvin Miller had figured out how to set up an office in Moscow, and that was done alongside of this Moscow Mennonite Fellowship. And this Alvin Miller hired 30-year-old Mary Reimer now as his office administrator. Mary was fluent not just in German and Russian, but also in English and French. She was especially helpful in handling all the varieties of communication that was needed by the Soviet officials, both the Russian and Ukrainian officials, as well as by Mennonite leaders and their American partners. So those were challenging months trying to survive in the new Soviet regime. Mary, as the story goes, would walk across, as she was walking to work, she would walk across Moscow's Red Square on her way to work wearing a red armband. Not because she had any affinity for the Soviet regime, but simply because blending in was the safest. Years later, when she lived in Winnipeg, that's a spoiler alert, she does end up coming to Canada. But when she lived in Winnipeg during World War II, whenever the RCMP would visit her house to ask about all the German correspondence that was coming to her husband, Mary was known to go to the living room and quietly slip on some nice patriotic British music onto the record player so the RCMP could hear that in the background. Again, just to show that blending in is the safest. But back to Russia. By March of 1922, MCC's first food kitchens opened up in the hardest hit areas of southern Ukraine. Mary continued to work in the Moscow office until one day early in 1923 that she knew that she would have to take a leave of absence for a different kind of labor. She and Jacob were expecting a child. Their son Harold was born in October of that year, 1923. Within a few months of his birth, Mary was back at the MCC office. But the stress of the times seemed to have taken a toll on Mary and Jacob's home. At some point in 1924, Jacob left for an engineering job in Tashkent, in Central Asia. Did he have a choice? Was he sent there by the government? Did he think it was only a short-term assignment? We do not know. Nobody knows what happened. But in any case, Mary Reimer and her little son Harold were left behind in Moscow. And she never saw Jacob again. And soon the divorce was official. Even with all this social turmoil, this personal crisis, and the serious vulnerability, Mary continued to work for the relief of the Mennonites. In the words of Proverbs 31, which described a woman of noble character, she opened her arms to the poor and extended her hands to the needy. Over the course of the next year, as Mary worked in Alvin Miller's office, she met another young Mennonite leader that was in and out of the building regularly. She grew to admire him, and he came to love her and her son Harold. And so it turned out that in September of 1926, 100 years ago this year, that Mary Brieger Reimer married a Mennonite leader by the name of C.F. Clausen. MCC's relief work slowed down, and the immigration work for those who were able to leave the Soviet Union grew in importance. This couple helped thousands of Mennonites emigrate. And then by 1928, they themselves finally left the USSR and emigrated to Canada, settling in Winnipeg with the rest of the Clausen family. CF continued in service to the Mennonite people for many years, while Mary took care of their growing family. They had 2 more boys and then twin girls. Mary lived a rich life, first in Winnipeg and then in Abbotsford, BC. She was happiest with only a few possessions, but surrounded by family and friends and a vibrant garden. Her last independent home was a small cottage, like a Russian dacha, if you've ever heard that word, on a property beside her two sons, Harold and Herb, and their families. And that's where I remember her as my grandma, as I was growing up. Sadly, she suffered a serious stroke in 1971, and she was paralyzed for 5 years before she finally passed in 1976. But she left a vast legacy of service to God and her adopted people, the Mennonites. At her funeral service 50 years ago, I still remember how Proverbs 31 was spoken again over her life. A woman of noble character. This poem beautifully described the many ways that her love, her wisdom, and her strength in raising a family, that she shared her love and her strength as she raised a family while her husband was often far away. I'm grateful that MCC is still carrying on the compassionate work of relief and development that she contributed so much to in that first decade. To Bangladesh. Reena Duri grew up as the oldest of 7 children in Agail Jara, Bangladesh. She dreamed of being a nurse as she grew up. But her father had few resources, and at age 13, she was forced to leave school when her parents arranged a marriage for her. Her husband was also unable to finish his education, and soon Reena began to understand the limitations of their life. Her father was poor, her husband had no education. They had very limited options to support themselves. So Reena decided to go look for work, even against her husband's wishes. In 1993, she went to a place called the Biburton Handmade Paper Factory. It was an MCC job creation project. She told the manager that she needed work, and she was hired. 1993. So this factory provides sustainable income for rural women. More than that, it empowers them. It's a great need in a region where incomes are low, where hunger is frequent, and education is most often out of reach. So this project, this factory, uses a local invasive species of water plant, a water hyacinth. And they developed a beautiful paper product that is made into cards and other items that are sold around the world at fair trade shops. So the changes in her family's life were tangible and were immediate as she got involved with this work. They became blessings for her family. And so a decade later, in 2002, and you can see her here after working almost a decade, Reena shared that with her new earnings, her family could eat twice as much as they did before she worked at the paper project. She could help pay school fees for her kids and meet other needs for her children. And her income helped her husband to grow his business as well, hauling people or supplies in a flatbed bicycle cart, and also helped him to find other ways to improve his earnings. So Reena, over the years, became one of the expert dyers at the paper factory. And at home, she worked hard to keep her own kids in school. When they wanted to be out playing or forget about their homework, she was the one that made sure they kept at it. Over the years, her son and her daughter not only finished the education that Reena and her husband weren't able to do, they went on further. And so you can see them now, a picture from last year. Her son, on the left, is now a successful dentist with a practice of his own. And you can see the growing family there. And her daughter, on the right, is a nurse in the capital city of Dhaka, living out her mother's dream of caring for others in healthcare. So, MCC's simple idea of making paper from a weed has blossomed into incredible richness of life for Rena and her family, giving them hope and a secure future and blessing the next generation with dedicated healthcare workers. It's amazing how a good idea in the right place can multiply to bless families and communities. A third story. Evelyn Mwende and her husband, Andrew Mao, and their 4 sons live in a village in southern Kenya. And yes, the older 2 are twins. The area in this part of Kenya has been degraded over the years with unreliable rains so that the fields have become much less productive. Farmers are struggling to grow food in this area to provide for their families. And women were commonly excluded from any financial decision-making and planning to deal with these problems. A local development organization supported by MCC and the Canadian Food Grains Bank set up a project to encourage over 20,000 residents of this region to try some new farming practices. Evelyn watched neighbors learn about economic development. She invested in buying 100 chicks, a little flock of chickens there. And she learned that she could cut down the costs of feed by supplementing the feed with, again, a local aquatic plant that she could grow herself in a little pond. She also learned about conservation agriculture techniques, such as digging these zai pits, as they're called. It's a traditional African conservation agriculture thing, which seems to have been lost and now is being revived again, where you just dig pits so that the water will flow to it. But more specifically, you dig it in the dry season, you put in the seed, a bit of compost or manure that attracts termites, which will aerate the soil better, and then when the rains come, it actually increases the productivity of the seed very much, and it's quite effective. So 3 years ago, Evelyn asked her husband if she could try out the zai pits on a small plot of what he thought was unproductive, infertile land, about 1/8 of an acre, the size of a decent city lot. She proved that she could get a crop there even when there was little rain. And the maize that her husband had planted the traditional way produced nothing. And so he was a convert. The next year, they planted a full acre with the new conservation practices and got enough maize and beans and lentils to last them a full year. This increased harvest, along with a number of other investments to expand their farm's productivity, made last year a bonus year for them. And you can see some of the activity and the increase in productivity there, with the duck, with the rooster, with the pond there for growing the weed for the chicken feed supplement. So last year they were able to purchase 2 cows, 2 goats. They expanded a garden for leafy greens and established a beehive for honey. They're also planting trees around their property as a fence. They're the thorny acacias, which are more helpful for keeping animals out, and they also help to restore the environment there. So this year they are working together to build a pond for more chicken feed supplement. Just as importantly as this economic and social, the benefits there that come from this economic and social work, Evelyn has gained the trust of her husband in making financial decisions together with him. She said, "He used to be the doubting Thomas, but now he believes." And it's not just that they have more income, they are spending more time together. They're working together, helping in the garden, and their marriage has improved. Andrew says, the husband says, "From working together, now we have a lot of harmony and peace and unity, and we're doing things that we were not doing together before. My wife is happy, and no matter what may happen, I will choose her again and again." So it's not just about chickens, it's not just about education, it's about blessing and increasing the family life there. The family life. One last story. Vera in the Ukraine. Vera was born in 1994. She is raising 2 children, Nazar, who is 10 years old, and little Rebecca, who is 1. Vera grew up in an orphanage in the Zaporizhia region. So you've heard that name in the news. That's part of the part of Ukraine that's been occupied for the last couple of years. Vera doesn't remember her parents. People used to say that she was found near a garbage dump. And maybe that was just childhood gossip, but the pain from those words has stayed with her all these years. Childhood in the orphanage taught her how to survive, but it didn't teach her how to trust. There was no one nearby who could guide, who could support, or who could direct her. After graduation, she entered vocational school to become a painter-plasterer, and that's where she met Mikola, her husband. They started a family, and in 2014, they moved to Nikopol. She says their life there was simple. They lived with her husband's grandmother, kept chickens and a goat, and planted a garden. But in 2022, everything changed when the war came and took away the peace from their home. During military training, her father-in-law was severely injured and lost both legs, and he's still undergoing treatment in the hospitals a year later. And so her husband's relatives now need to support themselves and can't help Vera and her children. Around the same time, Mikola, her husband, was mobilized, and since that day she's been at home with the children and her elderly grandmother, holding the line as best she can. Financially, it's been extremely difficult, as we can all imagine. The state there provides only the bare minimum, and even together with her grandmother's pension, it barely covers utilities. They survive thanks to their small farm, a poultry, a goat, and a garden, and of course, thanks to the goodness of good people. She learned about MCC's partner, the New Life Charitable Foundation, through Facebook and from local authorities. At first, she didn't believe anyone would really help. In an orphanage, she says, you get used to the idea that promises are just words. But she was met with real kindness and warmth. The family received MCC-supplied aid from the foundation at Christmas. And this was a huge support. The hygiene kits, the warm blankets, some canned meat. The canned meat was especially valuable to this young mom when she needed to throw together a nutritious supper, but was short on time and energy. And the buckets that came as a part of the relief kit turned out to be very useful around the household as well, she says. She says, when you have small children and have to save on everything, such support feels like a breath of fresh air. So the foundation the New Life Foundation doesn't just provide assistance, it changes how people think and how they see life. Because the New Life Foundation is a church. It's a church-based organization in Ukraine. So Vera was invited to children's events at the church. She says Nazar really enjoys these activities, and now she's started attending church as well, whenever possible. She writes, to be honest, after everything that I've been through, I do want to live. And I want to believe that everything will get better. But today I'm deeply grateful to everyone who helps people like us. And so I'm passing on her thanks to you as people that have supported the work that allows this kind of ministry possible. Vera says, thanks to you, I've realized that even if life began near a garbage dump, to God, we are still precious. And through the kind hands of people, God continues to work miracles. Religion that is pure and undefiled before our God and Father is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So when you support the work of MCC, you are helping to look after widows and orphans in their distress. We're grateful for the many different ways that you have faithfully been part of this work, with your donations, with your prayers, with your support of thrift shops. All of these contribute to what James in the Bible calls religion, what we might call discipleship or obedience that is pure and undefiled. So I hope these stories this morning have encouraged your hearts and have given you more glimpses into the kind of work that MCC does around the world in the name of Christ. May Jesus give you, as a church, much grace as you follow him and serve him here and share his love and compassion around the world. So I'd invite us to close in a prayer, and then we'll invite the worship team to come up for a closing song. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you for your love and your compassion. Thank you that we have experienced that through the forgiveness of our sins, for the hope of eternal life, and for the call to serve you, to be your hands and feet in our communities and around the world. I thank you for your family here in Foam Lake. I pray a blessing on them as they continue to serve faithfully. I pray that you would give them wisdom and joy and perseverance in the many ways that they are reaching into this community and sharing your love and compassion. And I ask your blessing on them now in your holy and precious and powerful name. Amen.